With only 8 episodes total, 1923 Season 2 is getting close to its eventual endgame. And with the 5th episode, Only Gunshots to Guide Us, the Yellowstone origin story is delivering big time on its epic Western promises. If you felt that 1923 Season 2 has been a slow burn, Episode 5 is where certain plot points become much more intense. With Spencer on the run in Texas and tensions heating up with the Duttons back in Montana, there's a lot on the line for this episode. Father Renaud and Marshal Thomas in their brutal search for Tina, who has managed to evade them so far. We also see how Alex is doing on her journey to Montana, which has been pretty much 100% awful. Runs' horse helped the ranchers with their wandering cattle and persuaded them to give them some work in the previous episode, hoping that the ranchers would let them to remain on their property for as long as they want. Tina and her father, however, hurried out of town and traveled north toward Mexico City as soon as they noticed wanted posters of her up on every street corner. Since it was outside of their purview, Marshal Kent and Father Renaud might not pursue them. However, Kent could easily see them from a distance because the road ahead was lengthy and consisted of 1,000 miles of flat, treeless plain. Pete made the decision to split apart the group in the middle of their trip in order to find some water for the horses. Runs, however, didn't want Pete to split off from the others because he was aware of how hazardous these areas may be. He thought it would be risky to ride by himself since he might get lost, but Pete assured Tiana, his true love, that he would return soon and that he wouldn't go too far. At the end of episode 5, Pete saw an animal and began to follow it down the valley, thinking it would take him to a body of water. To his surprise, however, Kent and Renaud were already there. They began to pursue Pete after spotting him in the distance while they were watering their horses. Pete fell when his horse stumbled during the chase. Before the screen went dark, he hastily drew his firearm and aimed it at Kent. We heard 3 shots fired in the final scene of episode 5 of 1923, and I think 2 of them were from Kent's pistol. Kent was a more proficient marksman than Pete because he was an officer of the law. We have already seen Kent's shooting prowess in earlier episodes when he shot down multiple innocent Native Americans by himself in the middle of the night. To put it briefly, Kent is more likely to survive the altercation than Pete. Hence, it would be reasonable to believe that Kent murdered Pete during the gunfight. Tina would now probably have even more motivation to murder these ruthless guys who had robbed her of everything she held dear. They murdered her grandma, her sibling, and now her beloved. It's clear that Marshal Mamie Fawcett is the only person who'd save Kent and Renaud. She could apprehend the men before they could face the woman's fury. Spencer had encountered some outlaws in the last episode who threatened to rob him as soon as he boarded a freight train to get away from some Fort Worth police officers. He sought some shelter under a tree in episode 5 to get some rest before continuing on his way home, but to his dismay, a new issue arrived at his door. This time, it was Marshal Mamie, the good cop, searching for Kent and Renaud, who had killed 3 local native children and run away. When Spencer mentioned Montana, Mamie, who was curious about the state Spencer was from, refused to accept the fact that the Indian girl and the 2 men she was searching for were also from Montana. Mamie had a suspicion that Spencer could also be a criminal, so she respectfully invited him to accompany them to the adjacent station in Amarillo so they could phone his hometown and confirm the information. Mamie called Sheriff McDowell at the station. He informed her that Spencer Dutton had been awarded a medal by the president for his service during World War I. It was clear that McDowell knew who Spencer Dutton was. However, McDowell wasn't pleased with Spencer's homecoming, despite Mamie being astonished to learn that he was a military hero. Spencer promised McDowell that he would not stop until he had put an end to the war these men had begun, and that he was returning home to get retribution on the men who had dared to bleed the blood of his family. As soon as he entered Bozeman, he asked Spencer to come see him before continuing onto the property. McDowell would probably attempt to persuade Spencer to resolve the conflict amicably without using any form of violence, but as far as we know, Spencer is a hunter, and allowing a quarry to survive is tantamount to burying oneself. He's going to kill Banner and his master, Whitfield, because a man-eater will always be a man-eater, and that is the only way to get rid of him. It was clear to McDowell that Spencer would not be returning alone. Before hanging up the phone, he asked Mamie to hold the man for as long as possible for his own sakes, since he was bringing a wave of anger and mayhem that would completely upend the town. Although Mamie was legally obligated, McDowell wished to postpone the inevitable. She gave Spencer the ticket to Montana that she had promised him at their first meeting since she was unable to arrest a man who had done nothing wrong. Before Alex could board the train in the last episode, she was robbed in a New York terminal and had all of her possessions stolen away. With the luggage she was left with, she was able to make it to the train on time despite having bruises all over her body and being unable to walk normally. Alex discovered the following day that the ticket she had bought did not include free meal service, and she was left without any money to buy herself something to eat. She hadn't had a good meal since leaving England, and she hadn't eaten in days. After she pleaded with the porter for some food, he brought her to his manager, who informed Alex that he would get her some food but that she would have to earn it. As a result, Alex began serving a variety of men as a server on the train. When a wealthy man attempted to put his hands under her skirt and touch her privates, Alex lost her temper. She was imprisoned in a cage at the rear of the train for this attack, and he beat his face black and blue with the steel coffee jar she was holding. Alex attempted to explain everything, but as is frequently the case, when those beneath them attempt to seek justice, men in high places become deaf. The man in the fancy clothes spoke with more credibility than the woman in the waitress costume, according to the train's in charge. Alex's cries were ignored, and she was labeled a mad criminal who should be kept in a cage. When the train finally arrived in Chicago at the end of episode 5, the authorities decided to turn Alex over to the police. However, an English couple named Hillary and Paul, who had seen the sexual assault and knew Alex was a victim, chose to step in and inform the officers that the man with the bruised face was the one at fault. Alex had merely acted in self-defense to preserve her honor when he attempted to touch her inappropriately. She couldn't go somewhere else, even though Alex wasn't going to jail. Due to snowdrift, the train to Fargo was canceled and may not be running again until June. Alex was in utter despair and had nowhere to go. When the English couple noticed Alex sobbing on the bench once more, they volunteered to assist her. They asked her to accompany them to their home in Winnetka so she could stay and temporarily rest from her travels. There she could wait until the train to Fargo resumed service, at which point she could continue traveling to Montana to meet her husband.